Matthew 24 and 25. We are midway of our study entitled Preparation for the End Time. We went through several very important items and points, but the obvious questions that come to our mind when the subject starts becoming real to us are, okay, when? And how can we know that we are getting there? This is exactly what the disciples asked Jesus about. Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of ages. Jesus' response, recorded in Matthew 24 and 25, is the topic of our study this week.
And there is a lot to cover in those two chapters, 24, 25 in Matthew. However, in simple words, chapter 24 represents Jesus' revelation of the events that will happen in the last days. And chapter 25 is his instructions and wisdom of how we can prepare for that time.
It is important to know when, but even more important is what are we going to do about it when knowing. Jesus makes some very important points on that. So, how can we know when this end will come? Jesus' first point is, be aware of deceptions.
This lesson starts and is primarily focused on one big sign. Jesus said, there will appear false prophets and false Christs. And this is interesting that the author of the lesson, from all the events that are described in chapter 24, historical and nature events, has stopped his attention on false leaders. And probably not by chance, don't you think so? In the past few years, I have seen individuals and groups who are very passionate about certain truths. And I haven't seen them doing nothing else but creating division and separation in the bigger body of the church. What drives these people to inflame such a confusion in the mind of the simple believer? I don't know. In my eyes and in my books, it's not the Spirit of Christ what's happening. See, I have told you ahead of time what will happen, was the exact words of Jesus.
The whole conflict started with a deception, and is probably the greatest tool for manipulation. Is it just me becoming more aware of it, or is it intensifying greatly lately? But I'm seeing deceptions everywhere. Fake news, so many teachings and interpretations, blurred reality and perceptions. Truth is what you're made to believe. Confusing, isn't it? A very powerful way to attack Christianity is by creating confusion. Christ is here and there. He said this, he said that. Here is one Christ, here is another one. And many of them alarming that the world is ending, so much that you get tired of it. You stop caring. You get even mad about this nonsense and want to silence anyone who brings up the subject. A very powerful strategy. But Jesus predicted it, and he advised us about it. Isn't this even more powerful?
Another big sign for the end time will be that a lot of people will turn away from the faith, according to verse 10, and will follow false forms of worship in this world. And yes, many people will be persecuted for their faith in Jesus, and probably will be even killed. But what Jesus' concern was, is whether those people will be able to endure faithfully in that time of trial. Jesus does not see it as an easy battle to resist the temptations of other false worships or the gravity of earthly possessions and passions. People will survive that time due to their previous commitment and obedience to Christ.
When there is a relationship, things are different. Relationships are developed by learning about each other and by building experiences. Learning more about God and building experiences with Him, nothing will be able to break this bond. Then Jesus mentions certain abomination of desolation.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning also that Jesus foresaw the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the temple. For the disciples, it was like an unbelievable shock. They couldn't believe it, but it happened. And Jesus also mentions that this abomination of desolation that is spoken of also in the book of Daniel will be a sign of the last days too. For us to understand that, It needs a much more deeper and detailed research. However, it will be, at the end, it will zero down to one thing: a religious apostasy. And as it was for the disciples to hear that Jerusalem will be destroyed, it would sound like an unbelievable story to us, this desolation, abomination of desolation. But when it happened, and when we see it, we will be reminded the words of Jesus: "See, I have told you about it ahead of time."
About this abomination of desolation, you called it religious apostasy, and I want to expand a little bit on that. There are religious entities that have usurped the right to grant forgiveness, taking it away from Jesus. This is a huge deal, and it's part of the deceptions that we mentioned earlier. But we're getting into the same boat when we shift the focus away from Jesus and into our own doings, into our understandings, or into anything else. And there is a lot of this going on today.
And finally, how did Jesus show us being prepared for the last days, for his coming? In two parables. The first one, about the 10 virgins, it reminds us of how much we need the Holy Spirit to endure this time with light and oil in our hands until Jesus comes. Because if you think that you can put the Holy Spirit to rest and be prepared for the bridegroom, I personally believe that you have done your math wrong. The second parable in chapter 25 is about the master who gave bags full of gold to his servants and he went away. It reminds us of that there is no way that it's possible we would know the character of God, who he is and what is he doing, and we will sit useless with all our talent. The goodness of Christ's kingdom needs to be distributed all over the world, and we got the talent for that. So are we occupied with working out those talents and those gifts, or we have other major priorities?
I'm very passionate about this last one. It does matter how we live our lives. Our duty is not to earn salvation. This is done for us. But to live a meaningful life. No matter how much we have or can do, develop it, put it in service, grow it. Interestingly, it's the single talent that gets buried. This makes me think about the small things in life, the things that we don't find time about, that we ignore, well, because they are small. What would it cost? So, to the question, when will these things be and what will be the sign, Jesus tried to prepare us. However, the open question remains for us, and it is, what are we going to do about it?
The study continues next week with the title, Worship the Creator.